Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the In-Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. Today I'm going to do a video talking about the current pricing of vinyl records in the US. A lot of people recently have told me that the prices of records have gotten astronomical. I posted a video recently talking about vinyl sales being down in the US. It was kind of based off of a misleading article using numbers that weren't really accurate, but that video got a lot of reaction. And the biggest set of comments that video generated were, I slowed down buying vinyl records because they've gotten crazy priced. They're ridiculously priced. I can't justify it anymore. And while records have gotten more expensive, there's no doubt about it. Everything has gotten more expensive in the last 2 or 3 years. I kind of thought about it a little bit. And in a historical perspective, I kind of wanted to see have vinyl records really have increased. You know, how do these compare with pricing for vinyl records in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? You know, has it changed? How much has it changed? So I kind of went through my collection to kind of see old records that I had and what they cost back in the day. And I went into the US inflation calculator and I kind of punched up some numbers to kind of see where we're at. So I kind of wanted to go through, I got about 10 records here, 8, 9, 10 records, kind of throughout the decades. And I took a little bit of notes. So this is kind of just a fun exercise in, have vinyl records really gotten more expensive? And while I say in the short term they have, that's undeniable in the last couple of years, but adjusted for inflation, have they become more expensive? So let's find out here. So I've got my first record that I found. That is Little Richard's Here's Little Richard. Now this is actually first pressing. Now the way records came back in the day, they didn't actually come in shrink. They had the prices a lot of times put on the back. If you look here in pencil, that was $3.95 in 1957. Now adjusted for inflation, that's $44.66. So holy cow, that was expensive back in the day. Now you can actually buy a brand new copy of this record today for $25.99. So this kind of pricing kind of fits a lot of what was in the 50s. So I would say in general, in the 50s, records were significantly more expensive than they are today. But moving into the 60s, here is a this is kind of a cool video too, in the sense you can actually check out some cool records because I found some of the cooler stuff in my collection to do this with. So this is a beautiful first pressing of the Miles Davis Quintet Steaming. First pressing, now back then records still were not factory sealed, but you sometimes would find store or distributor shrink like I have here. So 1961, now this actually was originally slated for $4.95, which comes to $52.52 today, but it was on sale. And you can see the sale price tag there is $3.25, which actually came to $34.27. Now, you can buy just a generic version of this, like the standard OJC, not the new audiophile OJC, because that's not out yet, but the standard OJC is still technically in print of this album. You can get it for $25.99. There is an Analog Productions audiophile version of this record that you can get for $39.99. But I will say, again, throughout the early 60s, records, even today in 2024, being more expensive than they were the last couple of years, still cheaper. Okay, so Revolver. Here is a US first pressing of Revolver from 1966. Now this originally was $3.79, but this was a sale price, so $2.74. And keep in mind, you can find records on sale now for $5, $6. You go onto my closeout section on the website, you'll see stuff half off that I'm just trying to get rid of because I've got too much of it. Box sets, stuff of that nature that are 50% off. So, but if we go by the first price, $3.79, adjusted for inflation, that's $36.88. And even the $2.74 price, adjusted for inflation, is $26.66. A brand new copy of this now in 2024 will run you $29.99. So, still cheaper. I mean, not the sale price. Sale price is close, but still cheaper. Let's move into the 70s. The Eagles, Desperado, 1973. This priced out at $4.76. Adjusted for inflation, that's $33.80 today. You can buy a brand new copy of this for $24.99. Actually, the copies of this, I want to say, are pressed by mastered by Chris Bellman, if I'm not mistaken, and they're actually pretty good sounding. So again, cheaper today. Now, this next one, Pink Floyd, this is the 1982 pressing, and you can tell because it's actually advertising the movie that just had come out. Now, double records back in the day, holy cow, were they expensive. This was $14.39, if you could see that price tag there. Now, adjusted for inflation, that's $47.02. So pricey. Nowadays, most things, unfortunately, are doubles, and you can find a lot of doubles for $30, $35. But that's because music, they kind of still have the CD mentality when they're manufacturing music, to where they can put, they put closer to 60 minutes worth of music as opposed to 45 minutes worth of music, kind of creating the need for a double disc. But yeah, you can buy a brand new version of this for $44.99. So, still cheaper. Audiophile records. Big thing, big part of my business, big thing in the modern vinyl world. Here is an original Sgt. Pepper UHQR from 1982. When these came out in 1982, they were $50. $50 across the board. They made 5,000 of them. Adjusted for inflation, that's $163.37 in 2024 money. So no matter how you dice it, whether it's an Analog Productions UHQR or a Mobile Fidelity One Step or a Craft One Step, any premium record, this was still more expensive in 1982. I think a lot of people who are newer to vinyl and aren't audiophiles from 20, 30 years ago don't realize how good we actually have it today in 2024. The amount of audiophile records from the manufacturers themselves, the labels themselves, from boutique companies like Impex, Analog Productions, Mobile Fidelity, we're very spoiled nowadays, but there was a point in time where you would wait a month, 2 months to get an audiophile release, and everybody bought it because if you wanted it, there wasn't 20 records coming out a day. But yeah, cheaper. Let's go into the late 80s, 1989. This is Chris Isaak, Heart-Shaped World, an amazing sounding record, by the way. If you have an original of this, you know. This was $9.99 back in the day. Now, we're getting to an era where things started to change, because CDs at this point in time were twice the price. You'd pay close to $17.99, and then by the 90s, $19.99 for a CD, so double. So vinyl records in the 90s started getting cheaper because it was an afterthought. So it wasn't the label's sole way of making money on physical media. You had cassette tapes, you had CDs, and vinyl records were made considerably cheaper. But adjusted for inflation, $9.99, it's $25.40. You can actually get a brand new pressing of that for $25.99. So it's actually, even while the manufacturers are starting to discount things in the late 80s and the 90s, you could still get a modern pressing for about the same money, adjusted for inflation. Okay, the 90s and early O's, things started getting even cheaper. Here's a cool record. I don't own a ton of sealed records, but the ones I have in my collection are quite fantastic. This is an original Black Album by Metallica, still sealed, with that beautiful $11.95 price tag on it. Now, adjusted for inflation, and keep in mind this is a double, that's $27.66. But even with, and part of me believes that this could have been slightly more expensive, because there is a spot here where a previous price tag was removed and this $11.95 price tag is put on. So it's possible this got cheaper, but assuming it didn't, $27.66 in an era where vinyl records were getting significantly cheaper as opposed to their CD counterparts, $27.66 adjusted for inflation, you can get a brand new pressing of that for $29.99. So very, very close. One of the coolest sealed records I own, because it comes with the original receipt. I have a sealed copy of Tool's Anima. Now, this was actually bought September 24th, 1996, here in Mesa, Arizona now this was on sale. It was a $12.99 record, but they had probably a week of sale, week of release. Customer paid $10.99. Paid with a 20. Change was $8.27. How cool is that receipt? Now, $12.99 adjusted for inflation, $26.10. The sale price, $10.99 adjusted for inflation, would be $22.09. This album came out in 1996. Now, I don't have a frame of reference to compare this to because Maynard is a giant douche and hasn't ever reissued this record, even though everybody wants it. So there's no basis of comparison. But I would assume if it did come out, it would be in some single-sided 6-disc Uber box set that would probably cost $200 anyways. So that's not really a good example. But you can kind of see how things were moving in the 90s. Records were very, very cheap. They were an afterthought, and they were that way in the 90s. Now, there was still audiophile labels. Like in the 90s, there was companies like Analog Productions making records that were $30. And adjusted for inflation, one of those early 90s $30 analog production records would have been somewhere, adjusted for inflation in like the $75 range. So things have gotten really good in the audiophile world. Things have actually come down compared to where they were in the 80s and the 90s, price-wise. And, things have been they're on par now or better where they've been for about 40 years. The problem for us as consumers is they're not as good as they were 5 years ago. Now, records can be looked at two different ways. They can be looked at as collectibles. They can be looked at as tools to listen to music. But in the world of collectibles, and this probably goes for a lot of different things, the stock market, collectibles, home prices, it's always a good idea to not really focus on the last price. And I mean, the price something was 2 or 3 years ago. Because you could shoot yourself in the foot. So you could put yourself in a scenario to where, something is $10. And, I'll give a prime example. I think I've told this story online quite a few times. In the early 2000s, I bought some Apple stock for maybe $6, $7 a share. Now, like a complete moron, I was young. Plasma TVs were all the rage. I got an Amex card. I bought a brand new plasma television. And then when it came time to pay the bill for that Amex card, I sold my Apple stock because I was young, I was impatient, I sold the stock. I maybe made, 25, 30 cents a share. I didn't lose money on it, but I think I sold it for around $6, $7 in that range. That TV and, Apple stock money in 2024 was like $1 million Hitachi plasma television. So, yeah. Fast forward to 2009, 2010. I had the opportunity to buy some app. I started investing back into the market again. I was a little older, wanted to be a little more responsible, and I had a little bit of money. But at the time, Apple stock was significantly more. I don't remember, but it was a couple splits ago, but it was a couple $100. And if I kind of had that mentality to where I didn't want to purchase it because it was so much more expensive than it used to be, I would have missed out on, another 2,000% gains. So if you're thinking about this as a collectible, if you're thinking about it as any type of investment or any type of collectible or any type of thing in general, it's always a good idea to kind of just forget about the past, because it doesn't really matter. What things used to cost don't really matter. Now, I understand people are in positions nowadays to where they can't just justify it, and that's totally different. But I've tried to find, whether it's investing or because I'm a big, I've always been into collectibles. So putting it in the term of collectibles, I always find it a good idea to kind of just forget about where the prices have been because they really don't matter. And you can get yourself in trouble and you can screw yourself with price memory. It's very dangerous in the world of collectibles. And I think investments in general, in a broad spectrum of things, even if you're buying a house. I mean, if you were looking at buying a house in 2009 after the crash, are you going to, oh man, the record, houses are so much more expensive in 2010 than they were in 2009. I don't want to buy a house. I mean, well, look what's happened since 2010 to home prices since 2024. So, I mean, this goes in a lot of different areas of life that it's a good idea to kind of forget about that kind of stuff. And I've gotten better at it with age. it's hindered me a few times in the past. I've got a long list of things that I had the opportunity to buy that I should have bought, and I didn't. Because price memory, it kind of builds on you, and you think to yourself, oh man, I can no longer get it for the deal. Now I don't want it. And the deal turned out to be a deal while I was debating that to myself, 10 years even after the fact. So records have gotten more expensive the last couple of years. But in summation, I think as a whole, they're not really any more expensive than they were for, a majority of the existence of the vinyl LP. In a lot of cases, they're actually cheaper. Now, the good days of 2001, 2, 3, where manufacturers were making these as an afterthought, those days are gone. I agree, but yeah, they're not outlandishly priced compared to the past. So, what are your guys' thoughts? Leave them in the comments below. Check us out online at theingroove.com. Until next time.